Okay, I believe we're live. Welcome everyone to the 25th episode of Human Mode Conversations. I'm Nogol Madani, founder of Glee Factor and host of this podcast and live chats. And today I have a privilege of talking to Sharlinee Maharaj, Vice President at Altitude Sports. Thank you so much, Sharlinee, for being here.
Hi, Nogel. Thank you so much for having me here.
Yeah.
Very excited.
Yes, me too. Me too, because I want all your insights to be shared with our community. So, Charlene, we talked about why we are doing these conversations. Like the majority of our community and an audience, they are like younger leaders, I would say Gen Z and millennials. And I really feel for them because they're going through an unprecedented times. They have to perform and transform. It's the world of AI. Am I going to stay relevant? How can I lead change? These leaders that I'm seeing are not the ones that I want to become. Like, there are so many question marks, and it's quite like, overwhelming. So for me, the goal of these conversations that, first of all, I want to expose them to a different kind of leadership that I think it's more future ready and human centered. I want to somehow, through sharing our guests, stories around change and uncertainty and pivoting, give them a little bit of confidence and hopefully sharing some insights that with which they can build their own identity and leadership capacity. So are we ready to jump in? Okay. So, I always start with a simple question, and it's fascinating for me how different it is from one leader to another. That what does leadership mean to you, and how has it evolved through the years? Because now you're an executive, but obviously you started as like a first-time manager, finding your way up. So, what does it mean to you?
So, I was thinking about this question, and I recently attended my son's music show. And what was interesting when I was sitting in the audience is that you have the maestro in the front, right? So you have the maestro who has the baton, and they are, conducting the music, making sure, standing in the front, directing the musicians, setting the tempo, just making sure everyone's playing their part, the flutes and everyone. And then it kind of I remembered when I did my MBA, a big part of leadership, or how we were taught leadership, was really around, you were the maestro of the orchestra. It was so much so that they actually brought in an orchestra for a couple of days, and you had a baton. Like, I still have my baton. I found it in my memory box like a couple of weeks ago. And you were taught how to then lead an orchestra. And the idea there is that there's this vision, there's this gravitas, there's this control, this direction type of leadership style that was being built when I did my MBA. Now, the truth is, when I was looking at that setup on my son's on the stage, I was like, oh my God, that was what I was taught. But the reality is, it's so not like that anymore. And you mentioned it just now with, just the reality of things, from AI to economic uncertainty, mass layoffs, COVID.
Yes.
It's less about standing in the front anymore. I find that maestro now needs to be standing with, like, inside of, they're part of the orchestra, right? They're there setting the tone. They're there thinking at any moment. Once again, there's the flutes and the clarinets. You know what? Maybe the flutes need to sit with the drums today because there's a better collaborative opportunity. Or maybe, I need to rewrite the music completely because, this has completely changed the way we're doing things today. Or last but not least, and this one is really fundamental, is more, we let someone else take that leadership spot, about stepping back and letting someone else lead the orchestra because they're closer to the problem or closer to the solution. So I find that's more where leadership is today. It's real, it's human, it's messy, it is you figuring out really in real time where you stand and where when are the moments you do stand in front of the orchestra, but when are the moments you need to get into the orchestra. It's consistent recalibration. And it's by the minute, there's always new information coming in, and you're consistently recalibrating the way you're thinking, the way you're doing things, and the way you're like reorganizing the way works get done, teams work together. So I would say what's shifted now, it's definitely more of a adaptive and more of a fluid type of approach. And it's not about being the smartest person in the room, standing at the front, knowing all the music notes and knowing what each, part of the orchestra does. It's really knowing when to recalibrate, when to jump in, when to jump out, when to step back. And it's just not that solo act
Yeah.
anymore. It's really
Solo
something
act.
that you're living and breathing.
And I love this, analogy around like becoming one of the orchestra player. Like it's exactly that collaborative leadership, facilitative leadership that we also talk a lot about, and building that safety that you're not the only one that who's leading, other people can also have a little bit of space. But one thing, Charlene, that I keep hearing from people, especially the younger leaders, is that we are expected to perform, to be the high performer. Like, how can people listening somehow balance this idea that I want to give that space, but at the same time, I'm expected to to somehow guard my space and my expertise and my control? Like, what was did you have such an experience?
Absolutely. I think as a leader, you always have that pressure to perform, right? You have that
Mm.
in like, I need to be the best. My goodness, sorry, my voice. I need to be the best, or I need to be the person with all the answers in the room. But that's no longer the case. The leadership style or what's expected from leaders for me is changing dramatically. I don't think employees are looking anymore for managers who have all the answers, who think they know all the answers. I think they're looking for leaders who could be honest, authentic, and give clarity more than anything of what's going on. The truth is, and all of these leaders need to understand, is that we are living in the VUCA world. Like we've been in VUCA for a while, right? From the volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguity, and it's not stopping. It
No,
will
and it
continue
won't
forever.
stop. Exactly.
Exactly. So I think as young leaders, that pressure that they're putting on themselves to be perfect, and I see it also, and we see it in the millennials. And as I
Yes.
mentioned to you, we just finished year end, and I definitely see how some of the conversations and so forth, hit them a little bit harder as they're living in this world of complexity and ambiguity, but also social media and all of this different pressures. So what I would say to them is that this concept of I need to be perfect and I need to step up and I need to be the person in the front, that's no longer the case, and they need to challenge those beliefs more than anything.
I totally agree that, more and more that I'm talking with guests here and also talking to leaders on the ground, I hear this idea that it's a mindset shift that we need for leaders and also for organizations, so that it goes hand in hand. There is another thing, Charlene, that I'm keep hearing from people that say that, what, but I'm not, because to give you an example, when I do keynotes or sometimes workshops, it's for everyone. Everyone is sitting there. And the minute that I say this is facilitative leadership framework, they say, but we are not leader. And for me, it's always like this idea that you might be a leader way before you have the title. Like, I want to ask you, or maybe I'm wrong. Like, I really want to just get into these conversations to really understand that what was that moment for you that you told yourself, I'm a leader? Like, it's something shifted for you.
Yeah. So, I, you know, I don't think there's ever a moment where you kind of sit back and you're like, boom, I'm a leader. I think it happens, for me, it happened very gradually. And it wasn't something I necessarily actively reflected onto and thought, I wonder what moments in time I'm actually a leader. And what is a leader, right? That changes every single moment of every single day to
Yeah.
depending on who's in front of you or what's needed in your organization or employees. So I think the realization for me, and we're talking about this in a couple of weeks ago in my team, and for me, the realization was seeing really that ripple effect of my leadership reflected through my team. So this is what I mean. This is what I mean. So like not necessarily they're copy pasting the way I did things, but the way they started approaching problem solving or conversations with other leaders or having like, just influencing others or taking opportunities to clarify themselves I saw certain like mechanisms, ways of working that I had, that I had brought to the group. And again, it's not that they're blindly following me. It's that they took it, they heard it, and then they made it their own, which
Awesome.
was so interesting to watch. And there's so many times, like I have all of these like very, a couple of buzzwords or phrases I use often as I convey messaging. For
Yeah.
me, leadership is about consistency. You
Yeah.
consistently message certain things, and that's what employees need. They need that consistent messaging to hear it, let it live, let it, you plant the seed, you let to see how you see how that plant grows. But I say things like keep it simple, from Brene
Mm.
Brown, clarity is kindness. And this is key for my leadership group. We have to be clear. Setting clear expectations is is a kindest thing we can do for employees.
Yes.
Details matter. What is the I hear a lot of solutions, which is really good. But talk to me first about the problem that you're looking for. But all to
Mhm.
say, I've had, what's fascinating is when you sit in a meeting and
Yeah.
then they bring it back to you, but in their own way and in
Yes.
their own
I love
approach.
it. So
And
you
and
really
they
understand that you influence them. Like you had
exactly,
an influence and an impact, to your
exactly.
point, and you also gave them that psychological safety and that climate for them to also adapt it on their own. Like they didn't just copy paste and say, I want to be her.
Exactly.
They're allowed to be themselves, but just getting bits and pieces from you.
Absolutely. And you realize, and I saw it in my team, but I also saw it, peppered in other pockets in the organization. I had leaders come up to me to say, I use clarity of kindness in my meeting. I get it. I really like it, Char. I was like, okay.
Okay,
And so I think
that's
in
very
those
good.
moments when you see these, but they also, how they're making it their own, at those moments, you're like, okay, I might be doing
This is
something right here.
influence.
There's some things that are resonating. And then you realize leadership is contagious, with the right approaches, with with these, the way you're working, the way you're doing things, it is contagious. They're not just looking or hearing what you're saying. They are absorbing you in full. They look at you in the moments, especially when things are hard. How did she react to that? When things change, how were those reactions? So I think with that and understanding, they're looking at the way you're problem solving, the way you're communicating, and it's contagious. That makes you so much more self-aware as a leader.
Yes.
Because now you're like, okay, now they're looking at, they're now observing, they're now like taking it in. And
Yes.
so that for me was a big shift,
I
and
love
recognizing that, and knowing because they're looking, because it's contagious, the way I lead, the way I
show up.
understand
You
my
show
job,
up.
the way
Yeah,
I
exactly.
exactly take those steps forward is going to be really important, has an impact on their confidence, on who they are as
Hmm.
a person, as an employee, as a leader. So I find that shifts the way you start thinking about that responsibility
Yes, and
of leadership.
accountability. And and I love this because like a few other like I mean yesterday or like I don't know, a few days ago, I posted something about because to your point, I also looked at many different leaders in my engineering career, and they were the ones that an amazing person shared this idea that reverse mentors, like I look at them and say, I don't want this, I don't want that, I don't want to be this, I don't want to become that. Like what had you have to let go of so that you build something that it feels authentic to you and you think that okay, this is what I want to also transfer in terms of skill sets? What were some of the things that you said, you know what, I don't want to be this leader? Because I think that more than what we
Yes.
need to talk about, what we need to embrace, there's so many leadership skills out there that would say, you know what, no. So what were some of those like moments or skill sets that you said, you know what, I have to let go of this?
So I think, I've been in the industry, I've been, in the HR role for a really long time. I've had the privilege of working in many different playgrounds. I've
Yes,
done
in industries.
retail, I've done technology. So I've been able to see a lot, learn a lot, had the opportunity and also the privilege to work with such incredible leaders. And some leaders that, it may not have been incredible, but you still learn a lot.
Yes, for sure.
So I would say that for me, the thing that you know, I had to maybe unlearn or
Yes.
learn more than anything. And to be honest with you, and and I think we all know this, is that we unlearn and learn every single moment of every single day. There's so much the speed, just things are changing exponentially. And what
Yes.
I know today is probably not going to be true tomorrow. So I recognize that. But what I would say for myself personally is this. So in the MBA, you do a ton of reflective exercises. There's tons of morning reflections. And when you first enter the MBA, they really talk to you a lot about, you know, where are you at today and how do you think you got there? Like what were the things that maybe happened in your life from your childhood to, to in between that got you to where you need to be. So really these deep reflections where you're like, okay, like what happened? What were those triggers or what were those circumstances that led me to be who I am today? And the idea behind this deep self-reflection is that the understanding that if you truly understand yourself,
Yes.
only then can you take the best foot forward as a leader and be able to lead others. So it starts with you. You need to figure you out more than anything. So it was really fascinating exercises. And what I recognize is that, so I grew up in the Caribbean. I was born here in Montreal. I grew up in the Caribbean, and it is a very different setup in the Caribbean, like the educationally, academically, and just society-wise, it is a lot stricter of an upbringing. School, you're
Yes.
taught to be the best. In like grade three, you're ranked like 1 to 25, and are you number one? Are you number two? So this like strive for excellence, and being the best was ingrained in me from like when I was 6 years old all the way. So when we moved back to Canada, education and that, pursuit of excellence was something that just was part of who I was and how I was brought up. So naturally, obviously, that's a leader I wanted to be, the perfect, excellent leader. And when you realize that you can't be perfect, and from my many experiences and many different playgrounds and difficult conversations and things that just didn't go my way and all of it, you realize perfection is not attainable. So at some point, I had to learn how to be not perfect, which again, based on where I was brought up and how I grew up in the Caribbean, was really difficult for me, and it was a struggle to unpack that and know it's okay to be messy. It's okay if things are superhuman, and giving yourself that kindness and that grace. Because again, where I've come from, that kindness and grace didn't really exist.
No.
You have to be the best,
Yeah.
no questions asked.
Yes, yes, yes. And I resonate with you because I like grew up exactly the same way. And I think so many probably female leaders in general relate to that perfection, that idea of like there's no room for mistakes and failure is something that I keep hearing from people. And it's interesting that like it's one of the first ways to become a better leader because
Mm-hmm.
you will allow that space for other people because like there are so many leaders come to me and say my team never shares a mistake, and I always say, but do you share your mistakes? Do you ask for help?
Yeah,
Or if
yeah,
you're just keeping that thing always like that perfect posture, obviously other people won't take the risk. So just
yes.
your point, by somehow embracing that imperfection, you are creating that environment for your team as well. And this is
Oh,
exactly the
absolutely.
moment that this is leadership.
And you're absolutely right. It comes with such a sense of humility. It makes you more collaborative. You're asking more questions, and you're also not afraid to be like, "Oh, you know what? I totally messed that up. Like, guys, I had a total miss, and what is it we're going to do about it?" And I try in my teams as well. I try to encourage that notion of smart mistakes. Right?
Yes,
It's more,
exactly, for
guys,
sure.
mistakes are allowed. But what I want to hope and ensure that we did everything possible, and things were just really out of our control. But we try to create those spaces for employees to feel
Yeah,
that that they're safe and that they're able to raise their hand, ask questions if
exactly.
they, especially in today's world with AI and all of these other things happening,
Exactly. It's inevitable.
they have
Yes.
an opinion. Yeah.
Exactly. Love it. So, bring me back to your earlier days. You're like a manager, leader. what was one of the challenges that you had? Obviously, you talked about perfection and how you grew up, but did you have a story or something that somehow shook you and had to somehow shift that mindset besides
Yes.
perfectionism?
So basically, when I started my HR career, I was working in HR as an IC for a while. Then I went on maternity leave, and then I started a new company as a leader. So
Mm,
that, that dynamic of, when you grow from an IC to a leader in the same company, there's, you have an idea of the culture, how things work, you have a bit of
yeah,
credibility, a bit of trust. So starting brand new, and it's your first job as a leader too. I haven't necessarily trained to be a leader either. So I kind
yes.
of just like jumped into the pool right away. So I started as a leader in a smaller company, fantastic group of some of the most talented people as I look back that had the
Yes.
opportunity to work with, but smaller company, smaller, very small HR team. I think we were three, maybe two
Wow.
or three
Okay.
employees altogether, so tiny.
Tiny,
And
tiny.
but it was a great size to start flexing those leadership skills. Like I entered the leadership gym, as I like to tell my leadership team, right? I'm
Exactly
starting
what
to
we
build
talk
some
about. Yeah, the
muscles.
muscles.
Exactly. I'm starting to use some machines here and there. But then, so it was a great environment to build muscle. Now, I was only there for a year. Then I took on the big opportunity. And so a year later, I entered as a director in a bigger company, bigger mandate, bigger HR team. So the challenge now was, reconciling, I was at the gym for my leadership for my 1 year part. I did a couple of reps. I didn't do enough, I think, to have supported the weight of what was this a new challenge. And the truth is, so the scope was major, the responsibility was huge. I was employee number 2, and the mandate was build fast, build strong, build excellent. And
Wow.
again, I only had 1 year of leadership experience. So, and on top of that, I think something that's unspoken as an HR professional, as I put on my HR hat here too, is that HR comes with its own unique kind of pressure as an HR leader. Because not
Yes.
only are you, you're expected to lead your own team, you're also quickly becoming a company leader, right? You are the HR person. You're the HR person who has all of the answers,
Exactly.
who is there to
You're the
support.
owner of the culture. You do, yeah,
Exactly.
exactly.
And you're now meant to help leaders with all of their people problems. Meanwhile, you have your own people problems, and you're also trying to figure out how to be a great leader. So,
Yes.
in smaller teams, obviously with one person, it's so much easier to collaborate, to understand what's
Oh,
working, what not's working. You get to a 10 plus direct report as a new leader,
it's a
like this
different
overnight, with different personalities and different growth realities and like motivations and calm styles,
yeah.
it becomes extremely complex. So the pressure was on, and I think in this environment, you had to build a strong foundation, strategically think, operate the business. You had to build credibility. People had to see you as,
Mhm.
as that leader as well. And as an HR person, as I mentioned, you're exposed to the entire company on day one. So
True. True.
with that reality and the reality of a new leader, again, very, very, it wasn't easy. And,
Of course.
there's obviously inklings of imposter syndrome all over there, right? Can I really do this based
Yeah.
on the background, based on what I was taking on? The gap of competency was large. And so, that was one of my bigger challenges. That was a moment where I was like, okay, this is going to be something else. But I understood now, looking back, in that moment, I knew though that it would be something that will shift fundamentally who I became as a leader. And I truly believe that. Like this I had to hire, the mandate was 100 developers by the end of the year. And we
Wow.
hired over 100 every year. The team grew exponentially. It was a fantastic success story. It was difficult, but it's where I learned the most. And that's what they say, right? When you're uncomfortable and in those conditions is where you actually grow the most, you learn the most. So I think as a leader, I had to do obviously a lot of things to get me to that realization. In those moments you're like, oh my God, there's tons going on. As a leader, my first instinct, and obviously I had to speak to some, advisors and so forth to kind of
Yes.
help get there. But it's the first instinct or the first thing you should be doing in a situation like that is building a strong team. You know,
Yes.
like you gotta find the
Mhm.
right players now with the right strengths. Maybe some bring, you know, you want to look for that diversity of strength outside of your own and build a really strong team for them to come in and support you on that front. Another thing that helped for me, I find, as a leader in HR, on that side of things too, it is a bit lonely as an HR leader. And I
Mhm.
find that, you know, a lot of the programs that are in organizations around, you know, new leadership programs and co-dev groups and so forth, it's harder for an HR person to bring their challenges to the table because challenges kind of include all of the employees. I
Yeah.
was lucky in my world that I was given a coach. You know, I had a coach who supported me through it, who I had an opportunity to talk to about things.
Love
I essentially truly believe that you could only become a great coach if you've been coached. And I
it.
see that and I felt that and I learned from that. And my
Yes.
coach, you know, I today I still, you know, I still have an opportunity to work with her here and there. And
Love
the
it.
way she taught me to look at things, to dissect things, the way I spoke and challenged me really, really helped me with the pressure, with, you know, finding my foot or finding my stepping in this very chaotic new leadership reality.
Yeah, and and I think this is a reality, Charlene, for many leaders today, that
Yeah.
they getting that title. They don't necessarily have the expertise. They had the technical maybe expertise, but they don't have the leadership expertise.
Yeah.
But then time is going super fast. They have to change. They have to, and it's just all this like things like falling on their head. I was like, okay, what I'm going to do. And I love you talked about understanding that you're not doing this alone and bringing a team together and relying on others. And also at the same time, building your own capacity through like coaching. Like many leaders that I talk to, they say that I don't have time to connect to my team. I don't have time. So they still in that individual contributor mode. I want to ask you, what were some of the insights, mindset shifts, practices that helped you move from individual contributor to an enabler? Okay, I brought this good team, or I'm just inheriting this amazing team.
Yeah.
How can I leverage that? How can I use this opportunity and not feeling the pressure that everything is just on my shoulders?
Yeah, it's not an easy one. And for me, obviously, I had a, you know, I think we all have our different journeys as it relates as you switch from a doer to someone who is really
Facilitate.
creating the right conditions for your employees to really reach their full potential, right? And
Yes,
that's actually our motto in our performance management at Altitude Sports. It's, you know, getting you or creating the right conditions for you to reach your full potential. So
exactly.
for me, you know, it took a couple of different pieces to get me from shifting from doing to enabling. One
Mhm.
of the more key things for me specifically, and this is the way I operate, the way my mind works, I needed business context. I need context. So
Got it.
I found for me, the more I understood how the business operated, of who worked with who, how do those KPIs connect to those KPIs, how are my KPIs influencing the business? The more I understood the business and the more I was able to set that context for my team,
Hmm.
thought that at that moment I was able to now start shifting from, you know, leading, directing to more that, you know, transformational aspect of things, right? Because if the more context you give them, the more why things are happening, the
Mhm.
more, okay, the business is heading here, you know, HR, we need to work directly with the business. If the business is not doing well, let's be honest, who cares about succession planning and all of that other
Yeah,
stuff? We need to be closely linked to the business, and that helps drive where we can add value and impact within the organization. So
love.
for me specifically, it was about that context and learning it and being very deliberate with it. And that how I did that was I booked one-on-ones with certain, you know, with leaders, with executive leaders, with departmental, you know, specific leaders who maybe
Yes.
ran very particular divisions or so forth, to really truly understand how things are working. And so
Yes.
when I get that context off, again, this is where lead or employees are reaching their full potential. A great example for this was like actually a couple of months ago when we were at annual planning. We determine the how many, so we have ramp up like at I'm in retail, we have a Black Friday, Cyber Monday sale or busy period that takes place between like August and so August to November-ish. In order to, and during that period we ramp up, so we double sizes of certain teams. Our CX team, we just add a bit more volume to support the sales that are coming through on the logistics side and the CX side. Now what happens is that they give the HR team a mandate. We need X amount of employees to be able to support this period of time. So HR became more like an order taker. We'll take your order, thank you very much. We will get you 150 people. See you later, bye-bye.
Yeah.
But what I did with the team, and this again for me is the context, and it shows the shifting between them just taking the order to now really asking the right questions. I'm like, guys, like how is it they come up with these numbers? Do you understand like the metric that they're using that then generates how much of that headcount you will need? Really take the time to speak to those business leaders, understand their metrics, understand how they come up with that headcount. Because when you truly understand the back end mechanics, you can then question certain numbers. You can then maybe ask them like, actually, you know what? I noticed how you put 10 headcount this week, 20 this week. But given the sales, what I'm seeing, maybe we can push it all into one grouping, which would be easier for my recruitment strategy. So for me, those are the type of things that I have done for myself, and I try to push onto my team in order to shift them from being that order taker to really an advisor of the business. So that's one big thing that's really important to me, is about learning the business. Because when they do that now, they start thinking differently. They'll collaborate differently too now with both teams. Because now they're coming on a bit of an equal setting where they can challenge ideas, ask very particular and specific questions. So they start thinking like a business leader and not just, again, thank you for your order. I will deliver X amount of employees over to you.
But one question, Charlene, that I hear all the time is that we don't have time. How do you intentionally plan these conversations and these connections and giving this space for these conversations to happen before say, guys, we got the order, we have to get 150 people in, let's start. Like, how did you create that space for yourself and for the team?
That is a great question. I'm reflecting here. So I think it's naturally how I operate as a leader. When I came into the organization, I am very, with my people and culture team specifically, I am very for, understanding how the business operates in order for the P&C team to align to that. So I've been the way we strategize, the way we build our OKRs, the way we set our budgets, it's that consistent mindset of really truly understanding how we connect the dots. The way I build slides, the way I think about, the way we think about programs and so forth. All of it comes back to data. For my team, we don't push things forward unless, of course, there's some level of understanding. This is what the people want. At the end of the day, people and culture were for the people, really by the people. We want to hear what are the things that are, that they love, but what are the things that they would like to see more of? And those are the data points that we use to influence programs, make decisions. And my team, we consistently build that. So they've kind of grown up or a part of that environment where we're consistently looking at data to make decisions. We're consistently reading the room to make good decisions. So I purposely make space for that. And we see the impact more than anything of those decisions.
I totally agree with you that you created that space. People saw the impact. So now they know that this is part of performance. Because, this is exactly what we talk about when we talk about facilitative leadership, is say, one part of it is like, what does a facilitator do? They give a space for reflection. They give a space for exchange. They ask good questions. They basically allow new ideas to emerge. And this is the foundation or prerequisite for performance. Whereas so many people say, but I don't have time for that. I need to perform. And then we try to tell them, but you will perform better as a result of the time that you dedicate to this, to build this foundation and infrastructure.
Absolutely. And
I
I
love to
see it
hear that.
often.
Yeah.
I see it often where leaders spend time, for instance, there's an underperformer on the team,
Yeah.
right? On a team, and leaders, a lot of them are, they tend to avoid the situation, right? Difficult conversation. I don't necessarily want to kind of deal with that right now because I'm really busy operationally. The ops is going, the business needs me. But then what ends up happening with that employee that may not be meeting your expectations, they are now not delivering. Other people in the team is now watching you as a leader, kind of accepting that type of behavior. That creates a lot more, chaos within the department. So by not spending the time focused on on these people related issues, on making sure you're setting the right tone in your team, you're spending your time in the right places to grow and develop, it it leads to bigger challenges, bigger problems that at that, you could get to a situation where everyone in the team is unhappy, and then no, you have no choice as a leader but to spend all of your time now focused on
Bring everyone now back together. Exactly. Not
exactly
just
versus you jump in, you make it deliberate, you make time and space to spend time with your employees, align on expectations, clarify them. It's a little bit at a time versus if you don't spend the time, then you're going to be stuck in it for a long
I
time.
love that our audience hearing it from you because I think that it's important that as an accomplished executive, you give that permission to yourself, but also to other leaders. Talking about like the future, all the changes and everything that's happening. I would love to hear your thoughts about what do you think would the leadership would look like in 10 years. Some people talk about robots are going to be around and all of that. Like, how do you see leadership evolving and what are some of those traits or characteristics that our
Yes.
young leaders listening has to somehow grasp?
So I mentioned it a couple of times in here, but the truth is, and you hear it now with AI,
Yes.
right? That the problem will never be the technology. The problem will be the people and really getting the people aligned to be able to, thrive in the world of AI. And I think that future and understanding that the future of leadership will need to be a ton more human, needs to be more human, more understanding. It needs to be more adaptive.
Yes.
Needs to be more adaptive and needs that comfort and ambiguity. So the VUCA thing I mentioned before, it's building the right skills to be able to thrive and survive in the VUCA world. I think, leaders who are going to be the ones that will survive will be the ones who are able to connect quickly to people. And again, coming back to my analogy with the orchestra, right? It's a leader who's going to sit next to the flutes and maybe, hear that tune or course correct them, or maybe, switch up the trombones with the piano player because the harmony or the collaboration dynamic could be more interesting. So it takes that leader to be adaptive, flexible, real time, but I would say a lot more human. One thing I think that would be really important, and I admire when I look at podcasts and I listen to others folks, there's one skill that I'm still working towards, but I think it's fantastic. It's the ability to simplify the complexity. And as I mentioned to you, we both, Des, I find she does this impeccably. Like the
Yes.
ability to take something that is complex, and this is the world we're getting into. It will be complex with AI
Yes.
and all these different things. How do you take that and be able to message that back to groups with clarity, consistency, and making it simple will be a super skill, I find, for
Yes.
leaders.
It's interesting.
And
One of our,
especially, oh,
yes, go ahead. Sorry.
no, I'm just saying with AI too, and we kind of use AI to help, craft or prompt certain messaging. It's becoming even more like it's, that simplicity, that authenticity aspect is, not always 100% there. So I find the ability to do that and to convey complex messages as though you're talking to your mom or your child is really where I feel that like super skill of leadership in this new world will be really, really fascinating.
I love what you share because we had another guest, and sorry to interrupt you. I got so excited that
No,
she
no,
said
no.
that we're gonna be translators, like the future proof leaders are gonna be the translators of complexity, and this is
Yes.
exactly what you're sharing. I want to just slowly start a wrap up, but before that, I would love to see because something that I hear from our younger leaders is that they think that the challenges that they're going through is extremely unique to them. I would love to hear what are you seeing in younger leaders? Like what are the challenges that you're observing in your team, in your organization, around you in your network that you'd like to share for us, just to somehow not necessarily normalize the challenge, but just to talk about this idea that this is what we are all going through, and we
Yeah.
can like somehow find this community through which we can do it together.
Yes. So I think, and you said it actually at the very beginning too, is that this generation is coming into one of the most complex periods I think we've ever seen, right? From COVID. And I think most of them became leaders or accelerated careers as COVID started. And that
Yes.
was a complete rethink. I remember at the moment COVID hit, you're like, how exactly are we doing calibrations online again? Like, how is this going to work? Like, it's impossible. But that economic instability, then mass layoffs hit, then inflation, and now we're in AI. So they're really growing up in a world that is the real VUCA. And
Yeah.
then you add on social media onto that. I did not grow up as in my times as leaders. Yes, it started, but it wasn't as the levels it's at right now. And I think that constant comparison is a lot more evident. I think that navigating this is a lot less predictable, a lot less stable for this generation. Now, arguably though, I find they are by far the most technologically savvy,
Yes.
culturally diverse, emotionally open generation to come into the workplace.
I agree.
You appreciate, you see it, like the impact. They're very driven by impact and purpose and inclusion and growth and being authentic. We're actually a B Corp certified organization. And from there, we did see an employee engagement service. But even when we're, thinking about becoming certified, a big part was understanding that the employees at Altitude Sports, that purpose is really important to them. And we see it now as a certified company in our engagement surveys. We're hearing from the employees, this is something they really appreciate about an employee at Altitude Sports.
Yes.
So with that, I saw, they're very driven by purpose and so forth. But what I want to say and what I've seen again, coming off year end and my whole year end
Yes.
series that just took place, is that there's this belief from them, and and they try to, not them, some, I'm not saying it's all, but there's this belief that if you're not exceptional, you're not rated a 5, a 1 on 5, a 5 in performance rating, you failed. And even so, if you were a meets expectations, you failed. You're an average. So
God.
I
That's
find this,
quite fair.
this mindset of like, well, it meets expectations is actually an incredible thing. It's telling us you have delivered consistently in with a company that is moving and shifting consistently. You've been able to deliver at a very high level. Like this is a great thing. But there is this sentiment of like, I failed. It's like, okay, no. But so there's these elements that I'm seeing with what they're going through with the social media and the comparison and so forth. I think that constant visibility and I need to move faster and I need to be better and I need to outperform is something that's adding a ton more pressure to
Pressure.
their reality and to their lives. I think that they need to now, there needs to be some support for sure, and I think a lot of that could come through. First, we're recognizing that this exists. I think there's an element of, I think, coaching that could definitely support and help some of our Gen Z leaders that are in the workplace and that are growing right now. But it's telling them you're great. You have it.
Amazing.
You have what it takes. Don't be so hard on yourselves. Be kind. Be deliberate with your rest and recovery. So I think it's just, and you said it too, it's this mindset shift that I think needs to start happening with this generation, but they got it.
Yeah, I mean, I love them, first of all. Like, I mean, I love them. I totally agree with you that they're doing things differently. They're seeing things that systems that are broken, they grew up to your point in the COVID, inflation, geopolitics, war, like AI and everything. But I totally agree with you that sometimes they want to have a big impact very soon. And that's why they don't necessarily recognize themselves when they have already done and a small impact. And that's where I tell them, and I think what you shared was extremely important, that just seeing your own team, that you're having an impact and influence there, that's already an amazing place. It doesn't need to be like millions of people. Like it starts with that. It always starts with
Yes.
that. So them becoming a more self-aware, compassionate leaders towards themselves and building that capacity, like transferring that identity and that capacity to other people and influence them. I think that's already a great starting point. No?
I completely agree